Each part of this series is a complete linear alignment that I am showcasing. I am sure there are more cities that could be added, but these are based on short alignments I identified while looking at a map on the internet of the region where I was living in Oklahoma City several years ago. My name is Michelle Gibson. I found these alignments not long after I found the North American star tetrahedron in 2016, when I noticed major cities lining up in lines, and all of my research is based on this original finding. I believe this is the terminus or key of the Earth's grid system. I have found so much information by literally connecting dots on maps. The starting point of this part of the series is Wichita Falls, the largest city and county seat of Wichita County in Texas. It is situated on the Wichita River. What we are told is that the area was settled by Choctaw Native Americans in the 1830s after they were relocated to Indian Territory from their lands in Mississippi as a result of the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek. This was the first removal treaty carried out after the Indian Removal Act, which was signed into law by President Andrew Jackson on May 28th of 1830, after it was passed by both houses of Congress just prior to that. The new law authorized the president to negotiate with the Southern Native American tribes for their removal to federal territory west of the Mississippi River in exchange for settlement of their ancestral lands. This is a fancy way of saying that the Indian Removal Act was put in place to give the southern states the land that belonged to the Native Americans. The Indian Removal Act was passed only 7 years after the United States Supreme Court ruled in 1823, based largely on the doctrine of discovery, and under which title to lands lay with the government, whose subjects traveled to and occupied a territory whose inhabitants were not subjects of a European Christian monarch. In other words, the Supreme Court ruled that the Native Americans didn't own their land. The Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek, signed in September of 1830 and effective at the end of February 1831, was one of the largest land transfers ever signed between the United States government and Native Americans in time of peace. According to what we are told, the Choctaw ceded their remaining traditional homeland to the United States, and Article 14 of the treaty allowed for some Choctaw to remain in the state of Mississippi if they wanted to become citizens. The treaty ceded about 11 million acres, or 45,000 kilometers squared, of the Choctaw Nation in what is now Mississippi, in exchange for about 15 million acres, or 61,000 kilometers squared, in the Indian Territory, now primarily the state of Oklahoma. The Choctaw were the first of what were called the 5 civilized tribes to be removed from the southeastern United States, as the federal and state governments desired Native American lands to accommodate a growing agrarian American society. In 1831, tens of thousands of Choctaw walked the 500-mile or 800-kilometer journey to Indian Territory, and many died. Like the Creek, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Seminole who followed them, the Choctaw attempted to resurrect their traditional lifestyle and government in their new homeland. Then, starting in the 1850s, settlers arrived in the area to form cattle ranches, like the Wagoner Ranch, started by Dan Wagoner sometime around 1852, with 15,000 acres for longhorn cattle, and which today is the United States' largest cattle ranch behind a single fence. It stretches from west of Wichita Falls in Wichita County, also covering parts of Archer, Baylor, Ford, Knox, and Wilbarger counties. The official naming of the city as Wichita Falls occurred on September 27th of 1876, and on the same day, we are told, a sale of town lots occurred at what is now the corner of 7th and Ohio Streets, a location that is considered the birthplace of the city. Then 6 years later, in 1882, the Fort Worth and Denver City Railway arrived. The railway's train depot was located on the northwest corner of 7th Street, said to have been built in 1909. The Kemp and Kell Depot Route building was called an example of the Renaissance Revival style of architecture. Industrialists Joseph Kemp and Frank Kell came to prominence as a result of their railroad involvement, and the Depot Route building housed offices for their expanding interests, as well as serving as both a passenger and freight depot. In the short time period of 8 years from the arrival of the railroad, this is a map showing how much Wichita Falls had grown by 1890. The City National Bank building was located at Ohio Avenue and 7th Street, which is where I noted earlier that a sale of town lots occurred, which was held the day the city was named in 1876, and the City National Bank was notoriously robbed in 1896. We are told that a flood in 1886 destroyed the original Wichita Falls for which the city was named, and that 100 years later the city built a 54-foot or 16-meter-high multi-cascade artificial waterfall at a bend in the Wichita River where Lucy Park is today to replace the original 5-foot or 1.5-meter-high waterfall that was destroyed in 1886. The falls are visible from I-44. Lake Wichita is described as a man-made reservoir that was said to have been completed through the efforts of Joseph Kemp, who, when unable to finance the construction of it as a bond issue, found a business partner in Galveston to privately finance the construction of the dam and reservoir with the establishment of the Lake Wichita Irrigation and Water Company. It was completed in 1901 at a cost of $175,000 and nicknamed the Gem of North Texas. Lake Wichita had a recreational area that included a three-story colonnaded pavilion, and we are told that by 1909, Lake Wichita was connected by an electric trolley line to the city of Wichita Falls. The Lakeside Hotel at Lake Wichita was said to have burned down in 1918, and the colonnaded pavilion was razed to the ground in 1955, we are told, after visitors were said to have lost interest over time in Lake Wichita as a resort. The Memorial Auditorium in Wichita Falls, located on 7th Street, just west of Wichita Falls downtown district, was said to have been built in 1927 in the hopes of attracting conventions and major entertainers. We are told that it was modeled after the Fair Park Music Hall in Dallas, which was said to have opened in 1925 with Spanish Baroque and Moorish architectural influences. One last thing I would like to mention before I move on from Wichita Falls is that I think it is interesting to note that it is the home of the United States Air Force's largest technical training wing and the Euro-NATO Joint Force Jet Pilot Training Program at Shepherd Air Force Base, and the world's only multinationally staffed and managed flying training program chartered to produce combat pilots for both the USAF and NATO. The next place I'm going to be taking a look at in this particular linear alignment is Ponca City, the largest city in Kay County in north-central Oklahoma, close to the state's border with Kansas. Ponca City was established in 1893 after the Cherokee Outlet was opened for European American settlement during the Cherokee Strip land run, which was the largest land run in United States history. The Cherokee Outlet was part of the lands the Cherokee Nation had acquired after resettlement to lands in present-day Oklahoma as part of the 1835 Treaty of New Echota. The Treaty of New Echota was signed on December 29th of 1835 by officials of the United States government and a minority Cherokee political faction known as the Treaty Party. Although the Treaty of New Echota was not approved by the Cherokee National Council or signed by the principal chief John Ross, it established the terms under which the entire Cherokee Nation ceded its territory in the southeast and agreed to move west to the Indian Territory. The Treaty of New Echota became the legal basis for the forcible removal of the Cherokees, which became known as the Trail of Tears. The Cherokees ended up selling their land to the Cherokee Outlet at a price ranging from $1.40 to $2.50 per acre to the United States government following a proclamation by President Benjamin Harrison, which forbade all grazing leases in the Cherokee Outlet after October 2nd of 1890, thereby effectively eliminating tribal profits from cattle leases. There was an agreement included in this land sale that individual Cherokees could still establish claims in the Cherokee Outlet. The Cherokee Strip land run began at noon on September 16th of 1893, with approximately 100,000 people hoping to stake claim in the free 6 million acres of land and 40,000 homesteads that had been opened up. The counties of Kay, Grant, Woods, Woodward, Garfield, Noble, and Pawnee were established following the run. These 7 counties were initially designated by the letters K through Q, respectively, with Kay County as the only one of the 7 to have kept its original name as Oklahoma moved from a territory to a state. This is the Kay County Courthouse in Newkirk, Oklahoma, said to have been built in 1926 to replace the original 1894 wooden courthouse, which was said to have burned down. Here is an historic 1910 photo of a building in Newkirk on Main Street, which housed the National Bank, as well as a drugstore. Back to Ponca City, the largest city in Kay County, and named after the Ponca tribe. The city was created as New Ponca in 1893 after the Cherokee Strip land run, said to have been selected for its location near the Arkansas River, a nearby freshwater spring, and access to the railroad. Ponca City was named after the Ponca tribe of Oklahoma. Approximately 700 members of the Ponca tribe of Nebraska had been made to forcibly relocate to a reservation in this part of northern Oklahoma from their traditional lands in Nebraska between 1877 and 1880, and of that number, 158 died in Oklahoma within a 2-year period. The credit for the founding of the city goes to Burton S. Barnes, a furniture manufacturer who sold his plant in Michigan to seek his fortune in the land being opened up in the Cherokee Strip. We are told that he organized the Ponca Town Site Company, through which he sold town lots that he had surveyed for $2 each. Then the new owners of the lots were determined by a drawing, after which Burton Barnes was elected the first mayor of Ponca City. This signage of him and the city's history is located in front of the City Hall and Civic Center of Ponca City. Called one of the most beautiful city halls in the United States, it was said to have been designed by Solomon Andrew Layton and built as an auditorium in 1916, which would have been during the First World War, and then the east and west wings were added in 1922. Solomon Andrew Layton, we are told, was one of the main architects of the Oklahoma State Capitol building, with construction dates given between 1914 and 1917, which also would have been during World War I. Ponca City's economy and history has been predominantly influenced by the petroleum industry. E.W. Marland was a lawyer and oilman who moved to Ponca City in 1908 from Pennsylvania, at which time he founded the 101 Ranch Oil Company when he entered into a leasing arrangement with the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch in Ponca City. In addition to being a focal point of the oil rush in northeastern Oklahoma, it was the birthplace of the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch Wild West show, which went national in 1907 at the Tercentennial Jamestown Exposition in Hampton Roads in Norfolk, Virginia, which commemorated the 300th anniversary of the founding of the Jamestown Colony, the first permanent English settlement in what became the United States. Then in 1917, E.W. Marland founded the Marland Oil Company, which by 1920 controlled 10% of the world's oil reserves. The Ponca Nation played a major part in the development of the Marland Oil Company, leasing resource-containing portions of the tribe's allotted land to the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch and E.W. Marland for oil exploration and development. Marland Oil Company merged with Continental Oil, also known as Conoco, in 1929, after a successful takeover bid by J.P. Morgan Jr. The company maintained its headquarters in Ponca City until 1949, when it moved to Houston, Texas. Conoco was owned by the DuPont Corporation between 1981 and 1998, and in 2002 Conoco merged with Phillips Petroleum, which had its roots in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, near Ponca City in northern Oklahoma, to become Conoco Phillips. The wealth of the company of E.W. Marland, who went on to serve Oklahoma as a United States congressman and governor, was said to have built Ponca City from the ground up, which has a high concentration of buildings described as Spanish colonial revival architecture, like the Poncan Theater, said to have been designed by the Bowler brothers of Kansas City and opened on September 20th of 1927. And the Marland Mansion, also known as the Palace on the Prairie, said to have been designed by Tulsa architect John Duncan Forsyth in the Mediterranean revival style and built between 1925 and 1928. The next place I'm going to look at in this linear alignment is Emporia, Kansas. Emporia is the county seat of Lyon County and is located roughly halfway between Topeka and Wichita in the Flint Hills of Kansas. The Flint Hills are described as a region in eastern Kansas and north-central Oklahoma, named for the abundant residual flint eroded from bedrock that lies near or at the surface. And it also has the densest coverage of intact tallgrass prairie in North America. What I find interesting about the landscape of the Flint Hills is the striking similarity to what is found in the landscape of Neolithic Britain, the beginning of which is dated back to 4000 BC. And not only is the landscape between the Flint Hills and Neolithic Britain similar, on the left is Teeter Rock, said to be a monument erected for James Teeter, the landowner located near the former Teeterville and Teeter oil fields in southeast Kansas. And on the right are 4 examples of the more than 270 such structures that have been located and documented here, mostly on private property, and of which the Flint Hills region is considered to have the largest concentration of this type of construction in the world. For comparison is this standing stone and the entrance of an underground passageway to Maes Howe in the Orkney Islands off the northern coast of Scotland. The entrance is aligned to the setting sun of the winter solstice, the darkest point of winter. This is Grimes Graves in Norfolk in England, a Neolithic site that is the only flint mine that is open to the public, where visitors over 10 years of age can enter the mine to see the jet black flint. We are told it was a large Neolithic mining complex dating back to 2600 BC. Are the Flint Hills in Kansas an important yet unacknowledged Neolithic landscape? Back to Emporia. Emporia was founded in 1857 and, we are told, took its name from ancient Carthage. And Emporia was a place where the traders of one nation had reserved to their business interests within the territory of another nation, and in ancient Greek it referred to the Phoenician city-states and trade outposts of North Africa, including Carthage and Leptis Magna, as well as others in Spain, Britain, and Arabia. By December of 1860, the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad had reached Emporia, setting the stage for it to become a major railroad hub. Emporia State University was established here in 1863, 2 years after Kansas became a state in 1861, and both of these years were during the American Civil War, which took place between 1861 and 1865. Emporia was chosen as the county seat of Lyon County in 1860, and this courthouse was said to have been built between 1901 and 1903 for a community at that time which was said to have a population of approximately 8,200 people. Ground level windows are noted here as possible mudflood evidence. By the early years of the 20th century, Emporia had become an important railroad center as not only the junction of the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad, but also as the main line of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. This photograph of Commercial Street is said to date between 1910 and 1919. The historic Granada Theater in Emporia is located on Commercial Street, and, like the Poncan Theater in Ponca City, was said to have been designed in the Spanish colonial revival style by the Bowler brothers of Kansas City. It opened in 1929. It was closed in 1982 due to damage and neglect, but local preservationists saved it from demolition in 1994, and it was reopened for public use. I'm going to look at Atchison next on the alignment, the county seat of Atchison County in Kansas. The year of its founding was 1854, and named after the United States Senator from Missouri, David Rice Atchison, who had interested some of his friends in forming a city when Kansas was opened for settlement. This portrait of Senator Atchison was credited to the Civil War-era photographer Matthew Brady in 1849. Atchison was the original eastern terminus of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway. The railroad was chartered in February of 1859 to serve the cities of Atchison and Topeka in Kansas and Santa Fe, New Mexico. Despite being chartered to serve the city, the railroad was said to have chosen to bypass Santa Fe because of the engineering challenges of the mountainous terrain, and eventually a branch line from Lamy, New Mexico, brought the Santa Fe Railroad to its namesake city. The Soldiers' Orphans Home was said to have been founded in Atchison in sometime around 1887 for the nurture, education, and maintenance of indigent children of soldiers and sailors who served in the Union during the Civil War, and eventually changed to the State Orphans Home, which was in operation until 1962. The construction of the current Atchison Post Office was said to have been authorized by the United States Congress in 1890, with construction of the Romanesque-style limestone building starting in 1892. The Atchison County Courthouse was said to have been built between 1896 and 1897 to replace the first courthouse, which had been built in 1859. When I saw the view of Atchison, Kansas in the top left photo, I was immediately reminded of the view of the city of Santa Cruz de Tenerife on the island of Tenerife in the Canary Islands, which are located off the coast of Morocco on the bottom left. Then on the right is a picture of the ancient city of Ouarzazate, Morocco, which I had encountered in my research, and its appearance reminded me of Santa Cruz de Tenerife and Atchison, especially with regards to the orientation of the buildings and the placement of the windows. The last place I'm going to take a look at on this linear alignment is Des Moines, the state capital and largest city of Iowa. It was incorporated in 1851 as Fort Des Moines, with the Army said to have built the fort in 1843. The stated reason for having a fort in Des Moines was to control the Sauk, an Algonquin language-speaking people of the Green Bay, Wisconsin area, and the Meskwaki, closely related to the Sauk, also known as the Fox, and also Algonquin language speakers. Their homelands were in the Great Lakes region. Both the Sauk and Meskwaki had been relocated from their homelands to eastern Iowa. The fort was located where the Raccoon River and the Des Moines River meet, which has the same appearance as where the Mississippi River and Missouri River meet near St. Louis in Missouri, and where the Blue Nile and White Nile meet at Khartoum in the Sudan, in Africa. Even though there was a flood here in May of 1851, destroying crops, houses, and fences, when the Des Moines and Raccoon Rivers rose to an unprecedented height, it was incorporated on September 22nd of 1851 as Fort Des Moines, and the name was shortened to Des Moines in 1857. This is an 1875 map showing a well-developed city of Des Moines in less than 25 years. This land ownership map indicated the original landowner plot number and many times their names. So, for example, this is an historic photo of the Des Moines Post Office circa 1850. Then this building was constructed in 1871 to house the courthouse and post office, and it was demolished in 1968. And then the U.S. Central Post Office in Des Moines was said to have been built between 1909 and 1910, which was the first structure the federal government provided as part of the City Beautiful project, a turn-of-the-century project the city of Des Moines undertook to construct large Beaux-Arts public buildings and fountains along the Des Moines River. Like the Central Post Office, the Des Moines City Hall was also said to have been built between 1909 and 1910. In the next part of the series, I will be looking at a linear alignment of cities between Monroe, Louisiana, and Lamar, Colorado. My starting point is Monroe, the parish seat of Louisiana's Ouachita, pronounced Washita, Parish. Monroe and West Monroe, which together are called the Twin Cities of Northeast Louisiana, are situated on either side of the snaky S-shaped Washita River on the top left, which looks like the snaky S-shapes of the Wichita River in Wichita Falls, Texas on the top right, the River Thames in London on the bottom left, and the Rio Platano in Honduras on the bottom right. These are just a few examples of the countless rivers and creeks all over the world that have the same S-shaped river bends. I do not believe this is a random or natural occurrence. I believe these S-shaped waterways are signatures of the ancient civilization and artificially made canal systems. We are taught these are natural, so we don't see and understand the truth. Here are the earthwork banks of the Washita River in downtown Monroe, next to the city's river walk, and the masonry banks of the River Thames in downtown London. Fort Miro was located on the site of present-day Monroe, described as a late 18th century Spanish outpost that served the Washita River Valley, named after Esteban Miro, the governor of the Spanish provinces of Louisiana and Florida from 1785 to 1791. The settlement became known as Monroe in 1819 with the arrival of the steam-powered paddle wheeler James Monroe, named for the 5th President of the United States. Apparently, the arrival of the paddle wheeler had such a profound effect on the settlers that the name of the settlement was changed to Monroe. Now a retirement community, the Francis Tower in downtown Monroe, the city's tallest building at a height of 179 feet or 55 meters, was said to have been built between 1931 and 1932, which would have been during the Great Depression, because the city needed more hotel rooms, and the owner wanted to compete with the top meeting location of the time in Monroe, the Virginia, which was said to have been built in 1925. And had 3 ballrooms. The hotel was closed in the 1960s, and it became a state office building. The building was restored in 2016 and became the Vantage State Building. Joseph Biedenharn was a German-American businessman who was born in Vicksburg, Mississippi, to parents who had immigrated to the United States following the revolutions of 1848, a series of revolts against European monarchies that affected over 50 countries, including Germany, and one of the factors of a huge wave of immigration to America that took place during the mid-1800s. The German immigrants were said to have typically come to America with money and greater ability to be mobile. Joseph was a candy maker, the first bottler of Coca-Cola, and the first to develop an independent network of franchise bottlers to distribute the drink. He moved his manufacturing and bottling operations to Monroe from Vicksburg, Mississippi in 1913. Joseph bought a crop dusting business in 1925, along with his son and other investors, and added 18 planes to the fleet, moving the company headquarters from Macon, Georgia to Monroe. This was the origin of Delta Airlines, which was incorporated in December of 1928. Delta's headquarters moved from Monroe to Atlanta in 1941. The First Baptist Church in downtown Monroe was said to have been built in Neo-Palladian style, with an octagonal dome, columns, and pediments, which is a triangular upper part of a building in classical style, typically surmounting columns. The church congregation was founded in 1854, and the present church was said to have been built in 1911. Palladian architecture was a European architecture said to have been derived from Venetian architect Andrea Palladio, who lived between 1508 and 1580, whose work was based on the formal classical temple architecture of the ancient Greeks and Romans. In downtown Monroe, the old Monroe City High School was said to have been built between 1900 and 1901 as the first school in the Monroe City school system, and was located where the Anna Gray No Park is today, named after a former First Lady of Louisiana. Why destroy beautiful architecture like this in the heart of downtown Monroe, only to create a buildingless public park? Here's a comparison of the old Monroe City High School on the left, and Parliament Hill pre-1916 in Ottawa, the national capital of Canada, on the right. This was the original Washita National Bank, which opened in Monroe in 1906. Before closing in 1933, the Washita National Bank printed 6 different types of national currency and moved locations twice during that 27-year period. It is important to note that Monroe was the ancient imperial seat of the Washita Empire, in an area known as Washita proper. This is a picture of the relatively recently deceased Empress of the Washita, Verdiasi Washita Turner Gostinell Bay, who passed away in 2014, and her granddaughter, Wendy Farrakha Washita, succeeded her as the Washita Empress. You are not going to find the memory of the Washita anywhere in our historical narrative, but they are found everywhere in place names, including but not limited to Wichita, Washita, Hatchetaw, Washa, Wabash, Washoe, Waxhaw, to name a few off the top of my head. In 1993, Empress Verdiasi published the book The Return of the Ancient Ones, on the true history of the Washita Empire. The Watson Brake Mounds are in the vicinity and are located south of Monroe, in Richwood, Louisiana. Watson Brake is an archaeological site in Louisiana's Washita Parish, dated to 5,400 years ago, and is the oldest earthwork mound complex in North America. It is located on private land, so not available for public viewing. Stonehenge, which has an earthwork very similar to Watson Brake around its perimeter, according to what we are told, dates from starting at 3100 BC, about 5,100 years ago. 38 miles northeast of Monroe, near the town of Epes, Louisiana, is Poverty Point. It is said to have become known as Poverty Point because the farming was terrible here. Its name was Awalmeka and was an ancient sacred city of the Washita Moors. The story that we are told about all the mound sites in North America is that Indians wearing loincloths were responsible for building the perfectly geometrically and astronomically aligned mounds and earthworks, one basketful of dirt at a time. This is not the truth and does not hold up with any scrutiny whatsoever. These are the kinds of artifacts on display at Poverty Point as being representative of what was found here. While perhaps they were found here, I don't think they were representative of the highly advanced and sophisticated ancient civilization that lived here. The artifacts on display at Spiro Mounds in Oklahoma, like this one here, would be much more representative of what was found at Poverty Point. According to George G.M. James in his book Stolen Legacy, the Moors were the custodians of the ancient Egyptian mysteries, and Meduneter, or Meroitic, the language of the Egyptian hieroglyphs. The Meroitic language and script are named after Meroe, the royal capital of the Kingdom of Kush, and located on the Nile River where it flows through in northeast Sudan in northeastern Africa. We are told that Fort Meroe was the original name of the settlement that became Monroe. Is it just a coincidence that these two place names, one in Sudan and one in Louisiana, sound phonetically identical? Or is there something else going on here that we are not being told about? The next stop on this linear alignment is the Texarkana metropolitan area, a region anchored by the twin cities of Texarkana, Texas, and Texarkana, Arkansas, and which also shares a state line with Louisiana. The story goes that the Cairo and Fulton Railroad reached present-day Texarkana from St. Louis in the early 1870s, and that the Texas and Pacific Railroad had reached across Texas to the Arkansas state line, where it had been decided the border was a logical place for the different railways to connect. On December 8th of 1873, the Texas and Pacific sold the first town lots for the future city. The first to buy was J.W. Davis, who purchased the land where the Hotel McCartney, said to have been built in 1929, still stands opposite Union Station. But the Hotel McCartney has been abandoned since the mid-1970s. Why build a massive building like this to only use it for 50 years? Similar idea with the Union Station across the street from it. It is described as a grand Renaissance station built in 1928 across the Arkansas-Texas state line and placed on the U.S. National Register of Historic Places in 1978. Amtrak still uses a small portion of the station for its Texas Eagle line, but otherwise the station has been abandoned. State Line Avenue follows the Texas-Arkansas state line throughout much of Texarkana. Thousands of locals actually live in one state and work in the other. In the distance in the center of this postcard is the Texarkana U.S. Post Office and Courthouse. The Texarkana Twin Cities are home to the only federal building in the U.S. that straddles the state line and houses federal courts in 2 jurisdictions. The 2 sides of Texarkana share a federal building, courthouse, jail, post office, labor office, chamber of commerce, water utility, and several other offices. However, there are 2 mayors and 2 sets of city officials. So we have an official founding date of Texarkana by the railroad in 1873, and here is an historic map of the city circa 1888. Here's an 1892 photo of Texarkana showing big masonry buildings, not many people in it, what appear to be dirt-covered streets, and mule-drawn transportation. And that in 1902, the first electric streetcars appeared in Texarkana after having had a mule-drawn streetcar system having been established there in the 1880s, only to have the electric streetcar system there discontinued in 1934 after only 32 years. I have circled where the Red River of the South passes through the Texarkana region on its way into Louisiana. I have also circled the names of the Wichita River in Texas, the Washita River in Oklahoma, and the Washita River in Arkansas and Louisiana that are all tributaries of the Red River of the South. Here's an aerial photo of some of the snaky S-shapes of the Red River of the South, and of some of the same of the Red River of the North at Grand Forks in North Dakota. With a straight line distance roughly of 135 miles northeast of the Texarkana metropolitan area, just slightly west of the state capital in Little Rock, in Roland, Arkansas, there's a special site known as Pinnacle Mountain that hasn't been brought forward into public awareness and represents how sacred ancient sites are deliberately covered up. This is a picture of Pinnacle Mountain, which is only viewable like this from the education pond at Pinnacle Mountain State Park. I had first heard of Pinnacle Mountain when I learned about a conference that was held there in 2012. I didn't think much of the name Pinnacle Mountain until several years ago, in 2015, when finding this image online. This was the beginning of my looking and then finding out more and more. It really got my attention. So I had to go there. It was about a 3 to 4 hour drive from where I was living at the time, and I went twice with friends. There are 2 more what appear to be pyramids next to Pinnacle Mountain, and this view is only obtainable from the Visitor Center observation deck on a relatively clear day, which I was lucky enough to photograph. Otherwise, access to all other views is completely cut off by private property and fences, and these are certainly not advertised as pyramids. Here is a comparison of what is seen from the Pinnacle Mountain Visitor Center observation deck on the left, and the pyramids on the Giza Plateau in Egypt on the right, in which they all seem to be facing in the same direction. The alignment next crosses over the Washita Mountains of eastern Oklahoma and western Arkansas between Texarkana and Oklahoma City. This is Cameron's Bluff at Mount Magazine, the highest elevation in Arkansas. I visited Mount Magazine several times, and this is where I started waking up to seeing what was really in the environment around me. As soon as I took the turnoff for the road that skirts the bluff, I started seeing a wall. It is such an ancient wall that there is some element of doubt, but there are some places you can really tell it is a built structure. The next place on this alignment is Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, the state capital and county seat of Oklahoma County. It is a major economic and transportation hub with its central location in the country and on the interstate highways, sitting at the convergence of I-35, I-40, and I-44. This is also where I was living when I started to put together what I am sharing with you, and where I first learned about the advanced ancient Moorish civilization that has been removed from our collective awareness. Oklahoma City was said to have sprang into existence on April 22nd of 1889, the day that approximately 50,000 participants of the land run that day claimed their land in the first land run in what was known as the unassigned lands. This lithograph, dated from 1890, was said to have been prepared 10 months after the 1889 land run. And this postcard of Broadway in Oklahoma City is circa 1910, 20 years later, with the same big, elegant masonry buildings, dirt covering the street, mule-drawn buggies, and electric streetcar system that we saw back in Texarkana. The electric streetcar system in Oklahoma City was ended in 1947. I'm going to focus on unknown canal systems in Oklahoma because this is where I have studied it the most. Canal systems were very important to the ancient civilization as a transportation system, in addition to a land-based road system. Because it was in fact a maritime civilization, they were as comfortable on the waters as on land. There is an acknowledged canal in Oklahoma City. This is the Bricktown Canal, a mile-long canal that links downtown Bricktown, a lively entertainment district, and the Oklahoma River. Now to some unrecognized canal systems. I took these 3 photos all at the same location at 36th Avenue and Chartel Avenue in northwest Oklahoma City. The first photo, on the left, is very reminiscent of what the riverbeds look like in Oklahoma. Ugly, red clay gashes. In the top right photo, there is a root system that appears to be growing out over air, and on the bottom right, what remains of masonry is still in place. This is as good a place as any to assert my belief that the cement industry is built upon pulverizing ancient masonry. It's not supposed to be there in our historical narrative, so we don't even conceive of it, so certain industries can do whatever they want because it doesn't exist. And where exactly do they get their stone material from? I don't know if all of the waterways called rivers in Oklahoma look like red clay cuts in the land, but so many of them do. This is a photo I took of a roundabout with ancient masonry blocks in the foreground, the road sign saying Cement Plant Road in the middle of the picture, and in the distance, in the right of the photo, the cement plant in Clarkdale, Arizona is visible. There's plenty of ancient masonry everywhere in this area, so they will never ever run out of raw material. The ancient advanced civilization was so massive that there is an inexhaustible supply of unrecognized masonry for the cement industry all over the world. This is a picture I took of the Oklahoma River in Oklahoma City, where it flows very straight, until it abruptly ends at Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, at which point there is only a red clay bed from there on out. I have marked with arrows the places along the Oklahoma River where there appear to be canal entrances. At the corner of I-40 and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, right where the river stops flowing, is what I call the thing. I noticed it at some point after driving past it a bazillion times, and I remember thinking, what the heck is that thing? So I tried to find out more information. I drove the short way up to the entrance. Right next to the entrance, there was a billboard that said something to the effect of Your American Indian Cultural Center and Museum. The entrance, however, had several no unauthorized entry signs. Well, apparently this project has been in the works for many years, and now they are saying it will be completed in a couple more years. But that looks like a very, very sophisticated and geometric earthwork to me. And you can't get close to it unless you're on an Oklahoma River cruise ship or are a rowing crew member. I drove around the block, and it is all locked up with businesses and an industrial park. This is Capitol Hill High School in South Oklahoma City, and the Central High School in Oklahoma City. Pretty fancy places to have been built for high school kids. This is the old Criterion Theater in Oklahoma City with its ornate styling, which was demolished in 1973 to make way for a shopping mall that was never built. Moving along the alignment northwestward from Oklahoma City in Okarche, there is a massive wind farm spread across the landscape. These turbines, however, are not just placed anywhere. They are placed in a relatively linear fashion within a defined space, so their placement appears to be intentional and not random. Also, all of the wind turbines that are running go at the same speed, regardless of whether the wind is blowing. I really question whether they are actually being powered by wind or by some other technology. At some point in 2016, I noticed that Woodward fell on this alignment: Houston, Dallas, Woodward, Denver, and Edmonton, Alberta. This observation got me wondering what was in Woodward. It is off the beaten track as far as the national highway system goes. The town was on the Great Western Cattle Trail, and we are told that Woodward was established in 1887 after a railroad was constructed to that point for shipping cattle to markets. It was one of the most important depots in the 19th century for shipping cattle east. Like Ponca City, Woodward was in the Cherokee Strip region of Oklahoma that was opened up by the United States government for settlement during the Land Run of 1893. Woodward lies in an oil and natural gas area on the shelf of Oklahoma's Anadarko Basin. In 1956, natural gas was discovered in Woodward County. Thereafter, Woodward enjoyed significant growth due to the opening and location of oil field service and drilling companies in Woodward. When I drove to Woodward, I stopped by Boiling Springs State Park, located east of Woodward, between Woodward and Moreland. I took these pictures of large white, pink, and gray cut stone blocks on the state park grounds when I visited there. Then, after a trip I took to Cusco in Peru in 2018, I trotted out the photos of Boiling Springs State Park and saw white, pink, and gray granite stone material there, similar to what I saw in Peru, like at Kenco, just outside of Cusco, and at the Coricancha in Cusco. After I left Boiling Springs, I came to Moreland and saw a facility that looked something like this. Turns out Moreland is a hub of the energy industry, including natural gas resources and connecting energy resources to end-use markets. I continued driving east on Highway 412 towards Enid, Oklahoma. It goes all the way across the top of Oklahoma and then on into Arkansas. Lots of ancient infrastructure all through there. All along the way, I saw features in the landscape that looked like these at Gloss Mountain State Park near Enid, a city which is 84 miles or 135 kilometers east of Woodward. At many places along the way in this drive, I saw what looked like fracking wells in the distance next to these features. For many reasons, I have come to firmly believe that there is a direct connection between the modern energy industry, ancient energy technology, and the Earth's grid system. Other places you can visit in this part of northern Oklahoma, between Woodward and Enid, include the Little Sahara State Park in Waynoka and the Alabaster Caverns State Park in Freedom, Oklahoma, in Woodward County. This is a view inside one of the largest gypsum caves in the world here. The Alabaster Caverns Bridge apparently collapsed in 1992, and when I was doing research on chimney rocks, I found out that we are told the one that used to be in Freedom was worn away so much over thousands of years that one day in 1973, big winds caused it to fall without anyone seeing it happen. Nothing strange about that statement, right? The next stopping place on this linear alignment is Liberal, the county seat of Seward County in Kansas. It was incorporated in 1888, we are told, after the railroad came by this small settlement in Kansas near the Oklahoma state line, where S.S. Rogers had built the first house in 1872, and where he built the general store and post office in 1885. From the arrival of the railroad, so the story goes, the town's growth began. The plot on the town site of Liberal opened on April 13th of 1888. The sale of lots in the next 24 hours, we are told, totaled $180,000, and within a week there were 83 constructed wooden houses, and within a year there was a boom, at which time Liberal was incorporated as a city. This is a picture of Kansas Avenue in Liberal taken sometime in the years between 1928 and 1938. In 1920, natural gas was discovered west of Liberal in what became known as the huge Panhandle Hugoton gas field, which contains one of the world's largest known natural gas fields. Oil was discovered southwest of Liberal in 1951, and in 1963, National Helium opened there, the largest helium plant in the world. The last place on this alignment that I'm going to be taking a look at is Lamar, the county seat of Prowers County in Colorado. Lamar was founded in 1886, and Prowers County was established in 1889. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad was said to have arrived through this part of Colorado in 1873, and the first station was established in 1886. The existing station was built in 1907, and in addition to being an Amtrak stop, houses the local Chamber of Commerce and a Colorado Visitor Center. We are told the railroad allowed Lamar to become an important farming and ranching community. This was the first county courthouse building in Lamar, with a construction date given of 1890, and said to have been designed by Bulger and Rapp, an architectural firm that only worked together in Colorado for 5 years before dissolving in 1892. The present Prowers County Courthouse was said to have been built in 1928 in classical revival style by Colorado architect Robert K. Fuller and A.E. Danielson and Sons. It is easier to carve words into stone than build out of stone. The Carnegie Library in Lamar was said to have been completed in 1908 and demolished in 1975. The Carnegie Corporation of New York was said to have provided 27 grants between 1899 and 1917 to build 35 public libraries in Colorado. As of 2010, I read 30 of these buildings were still standing and 18 still operate as libraries. This is Pike's Tower in Lamar. It is 40 feet or 12 meters tall and was designed to commemorate Zebulon Pike's 1806 expedition across Colorado, we are told, during which time they allegedly stayed at Willow Creek near Lamar, where Pike's Tower is located. It was said to have been developed in 1933 as the first project in Colorado of the Works Progress Administration, or WPA, another of FDR's New Deal agencies like the CCC, which I believe served several purposes. 1, to create Depression-era jobs. 2, to build park infrastructure. And 3, to cover up ancient sites and infrastructure. And in the next part of this series, we'll be looking at a linear alignment that begins in Clovis, New Mexico, and ends in Kansas City, Kansas. Clovis is the county seat of Curry County in eastern New Mexico. I lived in Clovis for 5 years between 1989 and 1994, moving there literally right after I got married. My in-laws lived in Hereford, Texas, which is also on this alignment. And since my husband was a military retiree, we ended up in Clovis because of Cannon Air Force Base. This is interesting to me because I am looking at Clovis with very different eyes now than I did when I lived there 30 years ago. It was flat, stark, and boring to me. So now, like everywhere else I look, when I see historic photos of the grand architecture that was there, like the Quivira New Santa Fe Hotel Clovis, one of the Harvey House hotels, a chain that was founded by Fred Harvey in 1876 to cater to the growing number of train passengers. I see the architecture of the original advanced civilization of North America, instead of the depressing impression I have in my memory of the flat, dusty landscape and the rundown-looking buildings that I remember from when I lived there. Oasis State Park is located south of Cannon Air Force Base and southwest of the city of Clovis. While it is described as a true oasis set among cottonwood trees and shifting sand dunes, what gets my attention are the cut and shaped megalithic stone blocks around the edge of the water. Blackwater Draw is located between Clovis and Portales on Highway 467, 1 mile north of Oasis State Park. It is described as an intermittent stream channel and an important archaeological site that was first recognized in 1929 by a local man named Ridgely Whiteman, with Blackwater locality number 1 being the type site of the Clovis culture. The Clovis culture is called a prehistoric Paleo-American culture of the first cultures that inhabited the Americas, dating back 13,000 to 11,000 years BP, or before present, and characterized by the manufacture of bone and ivory Clovis points, which were characteristically fluted projectile points. We are told the Blackwater Draw location was a place where generations of the continent's earliest inhabitants camped and hunted for mammoth, camel, horse, bison, saber-toothed cat, sloths, and dire wolf. There are also what are called sand dunes or sand hills around Oasis State Park and Blackwater Draw. I have long suspected there is enduring infrastructure underneath places in the world with sand dunes, like these in Saudi Arabia's Empty Quarter, which I found out about by tracking an alignment. While we are here, let's see what else is in Portales before going back to Clovis. Portales is located 17 miles or 27 kilometers from Clovis. Portales is the county seat of Roosevelt County. This is the Roosevelt County Courthouse and Jail, built by the Works Progress Administration, we are told, and completed in 1938, and said to have been designed by Clovis architect Robert E. Merrill and built in Art Deco style. Robert E. Merrill was also given the credit for the Curry County Courthouse in Clovis, said to have been built in 1936, over the site of the preceding Curry County Courthouse, which was said to have been built in 1910 by the J. Sterling Marsh Manufacturing Company. The main campus of Eastern New Mexico University, or ENMU, is located in Portales, with construction said to have started in 1931 and completed in 1934. Apparently, on March 11th of 1978, Downtown Portales was said to have caught on fire from an electrical short at the Sweet Potato Warehouse, the sparks from which blew into the original Tower Theater's air conditioning ducts, and by the time the fire was put out, 6 buildings were destroyed or damaged and caused $2 million to $3 million in damage. Nothing suspicious about the explanation for the start of that fire, right? Now back to Clovis. The history of Clovis began in 1906, we are told, when the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad was being constructed through the area, and the railway engineers were ordered to select a town site. The story is the city was named by the station master's daughter, who was studying at the time about Clovis, the king of the Franks, and believed to be the founder of the French Merovingian dynasty in the 5th century AD. The city of Clovis was incorporated in 1909. The Marshall Junior High School building is still in use today and was said to have been constructed in 1936 as part of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal Public Works Administration. This is an historic postcard of the old Clovis High School building, for which I can't find any information about. The main street of Clovis is paved with bricks. We are told the first patent for paving brick roads was obtained in 1889 by Mr. Mordecai Levi from Charleston, West Virginia, after which time we are told thousands of brick-making companies sprang up in the late 1800s and early 1900s to meet the demands of the millions of bricks needed to pave thousands of miles of streets throughout the United States. I did some research about the U.S. Patent Office on the subject of prism pavement lights a while back. Information about things being patented that were actually already there led me into wondering if, for example, the historical U.S. Patent Office played the same role as the Smithsonian Institution in covering up true history. This is the old U.S. Patent Office, said to have been built between 1836 and 1867, with this image of it said to be circa 1846. Today, the old patent building houses 2 Smithsonian Institution museums, the National Portrait Gallery and the Smithsonian American Art Museum. We are told that the original designer of the building, in the Greek Revival design, Robert Mills, was removed for incompetence in 1851, and that the building was eventually completed under the direction of the Dean of American Architecture during that time, Thomas U. Walter, in 1867, which was 2 years after the American Civil War ended. Then in 1877, a fire in the building's west wing destroyed some 87,000 patent models and 600,000 copy drawings. This is said to be a picture of one of the old patent office's model rooms between 1861 and 1865, all of the years of the American Civil War. One more thing to share before I leave Clovis. Clovis was planned to be the center point of a national supergrid and become a renewable energy hub. The project, called Tres Amigas, was planned to link 3 discrete North American electrical grids, the Western, Eastern, and Texas interconnections, on state-owned land slightly north of Clovis. Clovis was the planned location for it because it is where all 3 grid systems meet. To my knowledge, this project has never come into being. The next city on the alignment is Hereford, the county seat of Deaf Smith County in Texas. Hereford was founded in 1899, we are told, after the Pecos and Northern Texas Railroad was incorporated in 1898 to construct the railway between Amarillo, Texas and Farwell, Texas at the Texas-New Mexico state lines. Residents named the town Hereford in honor of the local Hereford cattle ranchers, cattle which originated from Herefordshire in England. Hereford is known as the beef capital of the world because of the large number of cattle fed in feedlots in the area. This is the Deaf Smith County Courthouse, said to have been built in 1910 by Chamberlain and Company in classical revival style, and the second marble courthouse built in the United States. Notice there are red brick streets in Hereford as well in the photo on the right. The county was named for Erastus Deaf Smith, a partially deaf frontiersman who played a part in the Texas Revolution of 1835 and 1836. This building served as the Hereford High School from 1926 until the new one was built in 1954, and is still in use today as the Stanton Learning Center. How about this photo of Hereford Christian College sometime between the time it opened in 1902 and closed as a college in 1912? The next place I want to make a stop at on the way to Amarillo is Canyon, the county seat of Randall County. This is the old Randall County Courthouse in Canyon, said to have been built in the Texas Renaissance style between 1908 and 1909. Canyon is the location of West Texas A&M University, which was established in 1910, and Palo Duro Canyon, the second largest canyon in the United States. Here you can see the Texas musical in the summer with the history of Texas we have been taught. In the park's outdoor amphitheater, I noticed the stonemasonry all around the amphitheater stage. The feature in the canyon, known as the Lighthouse, on the left, has a twin in Big Bend National Park in South Texas on the right. The next place on the alignment is Amarillo, the largest city in the Texas Panhandle and the seat of Potter County. There are large ranches in the Amarillo area. The oldest and still functioning today is the J.A. Ranch. It was founded in Palladian Canyon on the outskirts of Amarillo in 1877 by Charles Goodnight, sometimes called the father of the Texas Panhandle, and John Adair, an Irish businessman. The Fort Worth and Denver City Railroad provided the needed freight service to contribute to Amarillo's growth as a cattle marketing center in the 19th century. The railroad was chartered by the Texas legislature in 1873 and operated from 1881 to 1982. The location for Amarillo was established in 1887, when we are told that the location was chosen for being on a well-watered section of the Fort Worth and Denver City Railroad, which had begun building across the Texas Panhandle. Originally named Oneida, the city that later became known as Amarillo was immediately chosen as the seat of Potter County in 1887. The drawing on the left was said to be of the 1896 Potter County Courthouse. The building, located at 5th Avenue and Bowie, had the tower and third floor removed. It was used by the Texas DMV for a while, and it looks like the building is still standing, according to Google Earth, pictured on the right. This postcard depicts the 1906 Potter County Courthouse. The 1932 Potter County Courthouse was said to have been designed by an Amarillo architectural firm in Art Deco style and built between 1930 and 1932 with a crew of more than 500 local laborers. Then, after only 54 years of use, the 1932 Potter County Courthouse was replaced yet again by the current courthouse, which was said to have been built between 1984 and 1986. By the late 1890s, Amarillo was one of the busiest cattle shipping points in the world, and its population was growing significantly. This illustration was said to depict Amarillo's downtown business district in 1912. This photo was of Amarillo's Grand Opera House in 1910. We are told it was destroyed by fire in 1919. The natural gas and oil industries started to come to Amarillo when natural gas was discovered here in 1918. The U.S. government purchased the Cliffside gas field, which had a high helium content, in 1927, and was the sole producer of commercial helium for a number of years. The U.S. National Helium Reserve is stored in the Cliffside gas field's Bush Dome Reservoir. Polk Street is the downtown historic district of Amarillo. The former Herring Hotel is on Polk Street. It was said to have been one of 3 oil boom-era hotels built in the 1920s. Though the Herring Hotel is the only one of those 3 hotels that is still standing, it was abandoned in the 1970s. Moving northeast out of Amarillo along the alignment, just 17 miles or 27 kilometers away, we find Pantex, the primary nuclear weapons assembly and disassembly facility of the United States. It is a major national security site, and its grounds and airspace are strictly controlled. The country's largest federally owned wind farm is at the Pantex plant, and the construction of which was part of an effort to reduce carbon emissions by federal agencies. The next city on this alignment is Pampa, the seat of Gray County in Texas. Pampa was founded in 1888 on the Santa Fe Railroad line, and we are told that in 1892 received its current name for the location's resemblance of the surrounding prairie lands to the Pampas in Argentina. We are told the Texas Panhandle oil boom spread to Pampa, and that the city showcased its newfound wealth with elaborate downtown construction with Beaux-Arts architecture. Still functioning as Pampa's main fire station on the top left, the central fire station was said to have been built in 1919. What is interesting to me is that I have found basically the same architectural idea in the design of firehouses in very different places around the world, like the one in the city of Birmingham in England in the top middle, the fire station in the small town of Jerome in Arizona's Verde Valley near Cottonwood and Sedona on the top right, and on the bottom left, Honolulu's Palama Fire Station on the Hawaiian island of Oahu, and a fire station in New Zealand in the South Pacific Ocean on the bottom right. The Pampa City Hall was said to have been constructed in 1930 at the center of the Million Dollar Row. The Gray County Courthouse, also on the Pampa's Million Dollar Row, was said to have been completed in 1929 and designed by Amarillo architect W.R. Kaufman. It's telling that they painted the year on the building. Frequently, they at least engrave it when they are falsely taking credit for building the architecture. Downtown Pampa has red brick streets as well. The next place we come to on this alignment is Woodward. Woodward was on the Great Western Cattle Trail, and the town was established in 1887 after the railroad was constructed there to ship cattle to eastern markets. Woodward lies in an oil and natural gas area on the shelf of Oklahoma's Anadarko Basin, the largest producer of natural gas in the United States, and within which the huge Panhandle Hugoton gas field is contained, one of the world's largest known natural gas fields in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. One of the largest deposits of iodine in the world underlies many portions of Woodward County, and is the only commercial source of iodine in the United States. Woodward is a commercial hub in northwestern Oklahoma. Agriculture, oil and gas, and manufacturing all contribute to Woodward's economy. The original Woodward County Courthouse was said to have been designed by architect J.W. McNeil and J.R. Cottingham and built in 1901 by J.C. Blair Construction Company, only to be replaced in 1937 by a new courthouse, said to have been designed by architects Tonini and Bramlett and constructed by Bass & Sons Construction Company as part of a New Deal Public Works Administration project. There are 3 black granite cornerstones at the southeast corner of the building, with information to support those claims, as well as Freemasonic involvement. The next city I'm going to look at on this alignment is Wichita, the largest city in Kansas, and the county seat of Sedgwick County. We are told the city of Wichita started out life as a trading post on the Chisholm Trail in the 1860s, which was established to drive cattle from ranches in Texas to Kansas railheads, and was incorporated as a city in 1870. The Old Cowtown Museum is located next to the Arkansas River in central Wichita. Established in 1952, it is one of the oldest open-air history museums in the central United States, with 54 historic and recreated buildings on 23 acres of land on the original Chisholm Trail. I'm going to call this the John Wayne version of history, the false historical narrative that we have been indoctrinated in from cradle to grave. Monument Rocks, also referred to as the Chalk Pyramids, are located northwest of Wichita in Gove County, towards the western part of the state, and are designated a National Natural Landmark. The interesting thing here are the solar and lunar alignments found here. Mushroom Rock at Mushroom Rock State Park, northwest of Wichita, looks a lot like the rock formations on the moors of Great Britain, like this one in the North York Moors National Park in northern England. Same thing with Rock City at Minneapolis, Kansas, slightly northwest of Wichita, which also looks like rock formations that you find at North York Moors Park in England. Was the memory of the Moors in Britain retained in the name of what is otherwise defined as a tract of open, peaty wasteland, often overgrown with heath, common in high latitudes and altitudes, where drainage is poor? So to get back to the cover-up of the Earth's true history by the John Wayne version of history, I'm going to take a look at the Keeper of the Plains, a 44-foot or 13.5-meter high statue, situated where the Big and Little Arkansas rivers join together in downtown Wichita, where we see more of the snaky S-shaped river bends I talked about in the last part of this series, which I believe is signature infrastructure of the ancient advanced Moorish civilization. It strikes me that the statue is erected on top of what looks like ancient megalithic masonry to me. This is a river walk along the Arkansas River in downtown Wichita, with megalithic masonry that people walk on by every day, without even noticing it for what it is. I know I didn't notice it until I tuned into it, and that was just 5 years ago when I was in my early 50s. Then I started seeing it everywhere. I still do. The Scottish Rite Temple in Wichita was said to have originally been constructed in the Romanesque architectural style for the YMCA in 1887 and 1888, and that it was sold to Scottish Rite Freemasons in 1889. Wichita's Orpheum Theater which is still in use today, opened on September 4th of 1922, and was part of the vaudevillian Orpheum circuit, with well-known vaudeville stars performing there, like Harry Houdini, Eddie Cantor, and Fanny Brice. A Kiljan theater pipe organ used to be there. We are told that the Wichita lived here historically. At what point did they and other indigenous people go from being highly advanced to the hunter-gatherers we are taught lived in North America? Was the memory of the ancient Washita Moors in North America retained in the naming of this place as Wichita, like that of the Moors in Great Britain? I believe so. The last place I'm going to look at on this alignment is Kansas City, the third largest city in Kansas and otherwise known as KCK. It is the seat of Wyandotte County. Kansas City in Kansas is situated at Caw Point, a junction of the Missouri and Kansas rivers, and a place where Lewis and Clark stopped and camped in 1804. It was here that Clark reported encountering a great number of parrot-queets. The now extinct Carolina parakeet inhabited much of what became the United States at that time. The last known Carolina parakeet died in captivity at the Cincinnati Zoo in 1918, and the species was declared extinct in 1939. KCK was first incorporated in 1872, and then again in 1886 when the new KCK was formed through the consolidation of 5 municipalities. KCK was said to have seen explosive growth as a streetcar suburb of Kansas City, Missouri, located right across the Missouri River, and the largest city in Missouri. Kansas City, Missouri, we are told, once had one of the most extensive streetcar systems in North America. We are told that horse-powered streetcars were introduced in 1870, and that some early routes were powered by underground cables, like those of San Francisco. By 1908, all of Kansas City's streetcar lines, except for one, was powered by electricity. The last of its 25 streetcar routes was shut down in 1957 to be replaced by buses. The current Wyandotte County Courthouse in KCK was said to have been built in neoclassical style between 1925 and 1927 by the Kansas City architectural firm of White and White to replace the county courthouse that was said to have been built in 1882. The Wyandotte High School, still in use today, was said to have been built in the 1936 to 1937 timeframe by the New Deal Works Progress Administration and the KCK Board of Education. Across the river system, Kansas City, Missouri was incorporated as a town on June 1st of 1850 and as a city on March 28th of 1853. The territory around the confluence of the Missouri and Kansas rivers was deemed by the founders as a good place to build settlements. Noteworthy architecture on the Missouri side of Kansas City includes the Liberty Memorial, the National World War I Memorial and Museum, said to have been built in 1926 after a group of 40 prominent Kansas businessmen decided to form an association to create a memorial to those who had served in the war. Construction on the Union Station in Kansas City, Missouri, was said to have started in the early 1900s, and that it opened in 1914, operating as a train station until 1985. Today it features exhibits, movies, restaurants, and a science center. Like the current Wyandotte County Courthouse, the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art was said to have been designed by the architectural firm of White and White, with groundbreaking for the building occurring in July of 1930, and the museum opening to the public in December of 1933. The United States Courthouse and Post Office, still standing today, was said to have been built in the late 1930s as one of the last of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs. The new courthouse replaced the old post office and custom house on the top left that once stood at 8th and Grand Boulevard on the bottom right in Kansas City, Missouri. Every city that I have looked at on this alignment is a county seat, with the exception of Kansas City, Missouri. And in all 3 parts of this series, there were only 2 places of all the cities in linear alignment that I have looked at that were not county seats: Ponca City, Oklahoma, and Texarkana, Texas. Though Texarkana, Arkansas was. Is this finding the result of coincidence or the result of intentional planning of the original civilization? I land hard on the side this was all the result of intentional and precise planning, and not the random, haphazard process our historical narrative would lead us to believe. In the next and last part of the series, I'm going to switch over to looking at a linear alignment of major cities between San Antonio, Texas, and Buffalo, New York. San Antonio is the 2nd largest city in Texas and the 7th largest in the United States. The oldest municipality in Texas, it was said to have been founded as a Spanish mission and colonial outpost in 1718, the same year the Alamo was said to have been built by Roman Catholic missionaries. Our history tells us that the Alamo is most famous for the Battle of the Alamo, a pivotal event in the Texas Revolution, which we are told was a rebellion of colonists from the United States and Texas Mexicans putting up an armed resistance to the Mexican Republic. It was a 13-day siege that took place in 1836 between February 23rd and March 6th, at which time the President of Mexico and General Santa Anna reclaimed the Alamo Mission after killing the Texian, or residents of Mexican Texas, occupiers of the Alamo. Then, on April 6th of 1836, the Battle of San Jacinto took place, from which the famous cry, "Remember the Alamo," comes, in which General Sam Houston led the Texan army to victory over Santa Anna's troops in a very short 18-minute-long period of time. This paved the way for the formation of the Republic of Texas, which was an independent country from 1836 to 1845, the borders of which were based on the treaties of Velasco between the newly created Texas Republic and the Mexican President Santa Anna, who had been captured in battle. The Mexican Congress never recognized the independence of the Republic of Texas, though the U.S. did, and then on December 29th of 1845, it was annexed by the United States and became the 28th state on the same day. This is the Bexar County Courthouse in San Antonio, said to have been designed in Romanesque Revival style by renowned architect James Riley Gordon, best known for his 18 landmark county courthouses in Texas, 6 of which have been demolished and 12 of which remain. Some of the other courthouses he was given the credit for designing are the 1902 Angelina Courthouse in Lufkin, Texas, which was demolished in 1953, the 1894 Brazoria County Courthouse in Brazoria, Texas, which was demolished around 1930, the 1897 Ellis County Courthouse in Waxahachie, Texas, which is still in use today, and the 1898 Comal County Courthouse in New Braunfels, Texas, also still in use today. Though actually in 2 different counties, New Braunfels is part of the San Antonio-New Braunfels Metropolitan and Statistical Area. Here are the masonry banks of the Comal River in New Braunfels. It looks like a canal to me. New Braunfels is known for its German Texan heritage. It was established in 1845 by Prince Karl of Solms-Braunfels, Commissioner General of the Mainzer Adelsverein, or Nobility Society of Mainz, which was organized on April 20th of 1842 as a colonial attempt to establish a new Germany within the borders of Texas through organized mass immigration, and the land was purchased via land grants from the Republic of Texas. The Adelsverein was said to have ended its colonization campaign in 1843 due to a large amount of debt. One of the founding members of the Adelsverein was Ernest II, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and the older brother of Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, with the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha being the German line of descent of the British Royal House of Windsor. The San Pedro Springs Park is located about 2 miles north of downtown San Antonio. We are told the first surveyor of San Antonio, Francis Giraud, defined the park's boundaries in 1851, and the city officially declared it a park in 1852, making it the oldest park in Texas. By 1856, the U.S. Camel Corps had camel stables in the park. The U.S. Camel Corps was said to have been an experiment tried by the Army in the 1850s with camels, deemed to be well suited for the desert conditions of the American Southwest and procured from overseas locations, but was ultimately discontinued for a variety of reasons, seemingly because of Civil War-related issues. I really wonder if the camels came from overseas or were originally in North America. The 1976 movie, Humps, was based on the U.S. Camel Corps. The heart of San Antonio is the Riverwalk, a city park and network of walkways along the masonry banks of the San Antonio River, 1 story beneath the streets of San Antonio. Said to have been designed by local architect Robert Hugman, who is said to have submitted his plans for what would become the Riverwalk in 1929, with crucial funding for the project coming through the New Deal's Works Project Administration in 1939, which was said to have been used for the initial construction of 17,000 feet or 5,200 meters of walkways, 20 bridges, and extensive plantings of bald cypress trees whose branches stretch up to 10 stories and are visible from street level. It is important to note that there are bald cypress trees along the Riverwalk that are quite old, like the Ben Milam bald cypress, named for a soldier in the Texas Revolution, said to have been killed in 1835 by a Mexican sniper hiding in its branches. and the size of its trunk would indicate that it is quite old. The next place I'm going to take a look at on this linear alignment is Shreveport, the parish seat of Caddo Parish and the third largest city in Louisiana. The first Caddo Parish courthouse in Shreveport was said to have been built in 1859. We are told the first courthouse was demolished in order to make room for the second courthouse, which was said to have been built between 1890 and 1891. Then, again, the second courthouse was torn down in order to build the current courthouse in 1928. The Shrevetown Company founded Shreveport in 1836 at the junction of the snaky S-shaped Red River and Texas Trail, an overland route to the newly formed Republic of Texas. After the discovery of oil in Louisiana, Shreveport became a national center for the oil industry and the location of the headquarters for Standard Oil of Louisiana, also known as Stanacola, from 1909 to 1944, when it was absorbed into its parent company, Standard Oil of New Jersey. When I did a search looking for the historic headquarters building, I found the Standard Downtown Lofts Apartments in downtown Shreveport, said to have been built in 1910 to house the Commercial National Bank headquarters. Shreveport was the location of the Trans-Mississippi Department of the Confederate Army, which I first heard about when I was doing some research around Albert Pike, an influential 33rd degree Freemason who was a senior officer of the Confederate Army who commanded this District of Indian Territory in the Trans-Mississippi Theater of the American Civil War, also known as Oklahoma, and makes me wonder what was really going on here. The Trans-Mississippi Theater of the Civil War covered everything west of the Mississippi River, as pictured here. We are told that over 200,000 men were engaged in the Trans-Mississippi Theater of War, and there were altogether 7 battles in Arkansas, New Mexico, Missouri, and Louisiana between 1862 and 1864. This area was also the heart of the ancient Washita Empire, with Monroe, Louisiana being the imperial seat. In the Battle of Pea Ridge in Arkansas in March of 1862, the Confederate Army was led by Major General Earl Van Dorn, the great-nephew of Andrew Jackson, who ultimately lost the battle to Union Brigadier General Samuel Curtis. This was the battle flag of General Van Dorn. The star and crescent symbolism has been identified with Islam, and what we are told is that this happened primarily with the emergence of the Ottoman Turks, and for one example of several national flags are depicted on the modern Turkish flag. I also read where the Egyptian hieroglyphs of a star and the crescent moon denote the Venus cycle from morning star to evening star. Why would stars and a crescent moon be on a Confederate general's battle flag? The next place on this linear alignment is Memphis, the second largest city in Tennessee after Nashville, and the largest city on the Mississippi River. I found this illustration of Memphis described as an air view in 1870. Air view? What? How did they get this view of Memphis from the air? We are told air transport didn't come around until after the Wright brothers' successful air flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, in December of 1903. Here's what we find the main street of Memphis looking like circa 1910. Memphis had several department stores on Main Street. Many customers perceived Goldsmith's department store on Main as Memphis's greatest store. With its beginnings at its Beale Street location, in 1870 the German immigrant Goldsmith brothers, Isaac and Jacob, started doing business in Memphis. This was the Goldsmith Brothers store on Main Street starting in 1895 and became a true department store in 1902 when they arranged merchandise by departments, among the first in the South to do so. Elias Lowenstein immigrated to Memphis from Germany in 1854, where he opened Lowenstein's department store, prominent in Memphis for 125 years. He was a leader in the Memphis Jewish community and contributed liberally, we are told, to rebuilding the city of Memphis after the disastrous yellow fever epidemic in 1878, the worst outbreak of yellow fever occurring in the Mississippi River Valley that year. The outbreak originated in New Orleans in the spring and summer of that year and spread up the Mississippi River and inland. Yellow fever was so named because of the yellowish hue of the skin and eyes it causes, affecting multiple organ systems and causing internal bleeding. What we are told is that in July of 1878, an outbreak of yellow fever was reported in Vicksburg, just south of Memphis, so Memphis officials stopped travel to the city from the south. However, a man from a quarantine steamboat slipped away and went to Kate Bionda's restaurant in Memphis on August 4th. He was hospitalized and quarantined the next day and died, and Kate Bionda became Memphis's first death from yellow fever on August 13th, and from there the yellow fever infection spread quickly throughout Memphis. We are told mosquitoes were the carriers of yellow fever. Elias Lowenstein was said to have built his mansion in 1891, called one of the most important Victorian Romanesque mansions in Memphis, and one of the finest of its style in the South. This is an illustration of the original Lowenstein's department store in Memphis, said to have been built in 1886, with its classic mud flood feature of the slanted pavement from the ground level windows in the front of the building to the not ground level windows with the slant of the pavement, and showing dirt-covered streets as well. The Memphis Street Railway Company was a privately owned operator of streetcars and trolleybuses in Memphis on roughly 160 route miles, or 258 kilometers, of overhead electrified cable and rails between 1895 and 1960. Memphis could be traversed easily by passengers to within blocks of any corner of the city, but for some reason the operations were eventually abandoned in favor of city buses. Lastly, before I leave Memphis, here is an old photo of the 1897 Tennessee Centennial Exposition, with the Memphis building next to the Nashville Parthenon. This was said to be the Memphis, Tennessee, Shelby County construction for the 1897 Exposition, said to have been modeled after Memphis's namesake in Egypt. It was said to have been built out of temporary materials like plaster and wood, and was demolished after the Exposition. Was the Memphis Pyramid in this example really made from temporary materials? Or was it already there? The Nashville Parthenon, sitting right next to the Memphis Shelby County Pyramid, was also said to have been built for the same exposition. The architect of Nashville's Parthenon was said to be the former Confederate soldier William Crawford Smith. The Parthenon was also said to have been originally built as a temporary structure out of plaster, wood, and brick, but it was left standing after the exposition because of its popularity, and that it was rebuilt, we are told, with concrete in the 1920s. The next place I come to on this alignment is Louisville, the largest city in Kentucky and the seat of Jefferson County on the border with the state of Indiana. Founded in 1778 on the Ohio River, Louisville is one of the oldest cities west of the Appalachian Mountains, and the settlement was said to have grown as a portage site for Ohio River traffic because of the Falls of the Ohio, the only obstruction for river traffic between the upper Ohio River and the Gulf of Mexico. The Falls of the Ohio were also where Lewis and his crew met up with Clark at what is now Clarksville, Indiana, in October of 1803, across the river from Louisville, Kentucky. After a keel boat for their expedition was said to have been built to Lewis's specifications near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the summer of 1803. The earliest settlements around the Falls of the Ohio are shown here. I can't help but notice the presence of Fort Nelson on the Louisville, Kentucky side of the Ohio River, and Fort Finney on the Jeffersonville, Indiana side of it. I frequently find pairs or clusters of star forts all over the earth in the research work I've done of tracking cities in alignment with each other over long distances, like the example of the 4 pairs of star forts along the lower and upper New York Bay, with each pair situated along various points, starting from Fort Hancock on Sandy Hook Island in New Jersey, and Fort Tilden on the Rockaway Peninsula in New York at the entrance of the lower New York Bay. The pair of star forts on either side of the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, with Fort Wadsworth on the Staten Island side of the bridge, and Fort Hamilton on the Brooklyn side. Fort Wood, upon which the Statue of Liberty stands on top of, which was situated across from the no longer standing Fort Gibson on Ellis Island, and the pair of Fort Jay on Governor's Island, and what was Fort Amsterdam in Battery Park in Lower Manhattan. One definition of the word battery is a device that produces electricity that may have several primary or secondary cells arranged in parallel or series, as well as a battery source of energy which provides a push or a voltage of energy to get the current flowing in a circuit. I think this is the reason there are so many star forts that are paired together, or even the reason clusters of them are found in the same location, because they originally functioned as circuitry and batteries for the purpose of producing electricity and or some form of free energy to power the planetary grid system of the advanced civilization. At any rate, neither of the star forts situated across from each other next to the Falls of the Ohio are still standing. There is now a park in Louisville called Fort Nelson Park. Fort Nelson itself was said to have been built in 1781 by troops under George Rogers Clark, the brother of William Clark of Lewis and Clark fame, between the river and Main Street, and said to have been used as a courthouse and jail until one was built. Fort Finney, directly across the Ohio River from Fort Nelson and situated where the Kennedy Bridge is today, was said to have been built in 1786 and abandoned sometime in the 1790s. The location of Fort Finney was Jeffersonville, a settlement that was established in 1801, the year Thomas Jefferson took office. We are told that residents of the new settlement used a grid pattern designed by Thomas Jefferson for the formation of the city starting in 1802. The Jeffersonville Quartermaster Depot was said to have been built starting in 1871 by the U.S. Army with the design of Quartermaster General Montgomery Meigs and Frederick Law Olmsted as an edifice to contain all the individual quartermaster units that had spread all around Jeffersonville and was used for the manufacture of military uniforms and supplies. The 100-foot or 30-meter high tower in front of the main building of the depot was raised in 1900. By 1870, 17% of the citizenry of Jeffersonville were foreign-born, mostly from Germany. This is the German-American bank location in Jeffersonville today. Back to Louisville. We are told the construction of the Jefferson County Courthouse started in 1837, and the city of Louisville and Jefferson County started to use it in 1842, though its full construction was said to have not been completed until 1860, which would have been the year before the beginning of the American Civil War. It was the founding city of the Louisville-Nashville Railroad, which grew into a 6,000-mile or 9,700-kilometer system across 13 states. We are told it was first chartered by the Commonwealth of Kentucky in 1850 and grew into one of the great success stories of American business, operating continuously for 133 years under the same name, and that its first line extended from just south of Louisville, with the laying of tracks starting in 1853 and taking until 1859 to reach its second namesake city of Nashville, with 180 miles or 290 kilometers of track. The Union Station in Louisville, still standing today, closed as a railway station, but is currently serving as the offices for the Transit Authority of River City. Construction of the station was said to have begun in 1880 and completed in 1889. The first Kentucky Derby was held in Louisville on May 17th of 1875 at the Louisville Jockey Club track, later renamed Churchill Downs. The inner bluegrass region of Kentucky was a center of breeding high-quality thoroughbred racehorses and other livestock since the 19th century. The next place on the alignment I'm going to check out is Cincinnati, a major city in Ohio, located across the Ohio River, which marks the state line with Kentucky and is the county seat of Hamilton County. The Cincinnati City Hall was said to have been designed by Samuel Hannaford in Richardsonian Romanesque style and completed in 1893. Richardsonian Romanesque was named after the 19th century architect Henry Hobson Richardson. Interestingly, Mr. Richardson was said to never have finished his architecture studies in Paris due to the Civil War. He was also said to have died at the young age of 47 after having a prolific career in the design of mind-blowingly sophisticated and ornate buildings of heavy masonry, like the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall on the left and the Ames Free Library on the right in northeastern Massachusetts. This is the current Hamilton County Courthouse in Cincinnati. It was said to have been built between 1915 and 1919, with construction of it starting during World War I by the Charles McCall Company. This is the Cincinnati Union Terminal, which has the largest half-dome in the Western Hemisphere. The architectural firm of Fellheimer and Wagoner were given the credit for the architectural design of the terminal, and work on it was said to have started in 1928 and completed in 1933. It is still in use today as an Amtrak train station, as well as housing different aspects of the Cincinnati Museum Center, which includes 3 museums, a library, and a theater. I mean, doesn't the main shape of the Cincinnati Union Terminal resemble that of an airplane hangar? On the back side of the terminal, what was called Tower A is still standing, but Tower B and Tower C are no more. At the time the Cincinnati Union Terminal opened, it served 7 railroads, with 216 trains entering or departing the terminal each day. These towers controlled the track switches, actuated by electro-pneumatic machines, utilizing compressed air through valves which were energized by electric signals from the towers, and were described as being similar to the control towers of airports. This is what we are told about airships in our historical narrative. Australian inventor William Bland sent designs for his Admotic airship to the 1851 Great Exhibition in the Crystal Palace in London, where a model was displayed. This was an elongated balloon with a steam engine driving twin propellers suspended underneath. Then, in 1852, Frenchman Henri Giffard was credited as being the first person to make an engine-powered flight when he flew 17 miles, or 27 kilometers, in a steam-powered airship, and airships would develop considerably over the next 2 decades. The era of the airships in our historical narrative was somewhere between 1900 and 1940. We are told their use decreased as their capabilities were surpassed by those of airplanes. Sounds like the story we are told about the superior capability of trains causing the use of canals for transportation to become obsolete. Then we are told the decline of airships was accelerated by a series of high-profile accidents, including the 1937 burning of the German Hindenburg airship. This is the Eden Park standpipe in Cincinnati, said to have been completed in 1894 by the same Samuel Hannaford architectural firm responsible for the City Hall, and was said to have been built to provide sufficient water pressure for the Walnut Hills neighborhood of the city. At one time, a copper spire adorned the turret, removed in 1943 for a war scrap drive. A public observation deck that once operated is no longer accessible to visitors, though most likely it served more than one purpose on the Earth's original energy grid system. How hard is it to envision this structure as an airship docking station? The next place on the alignment is Erie, the largest city in northwestern Pennsylvania and the seat of Erie County. Erie is halfway between Buffalo, New York, and Cleveland, Ohio, on the south shore of Lake Erie. We are told the French were the first Europeans to arrive in the area, which had been inhabited historically by the indigenous Erie people, and that the French were the ones to construct Fort Prescott Isle near Erie in 1753 to protect the northern terminus of the Venango Path, the year before the beginning of the French and Indian Wars in 1754, which lasted until 1763. Fort Prescott Isle was abandoned only 6 years later. The Venango Path was a Native American trail between the canal-looking forks of the Ohio at present-day Pittsburgh and Prescott Isle at present-day Erie, Pennsylvania. The French were said to have built Fort Le Boeuf that same year, with the reason given to guard the road into the Ohio Valley, and it was also abandoned at the same time as Fort Prescott Isle. Fort Mackalt was also included in this line of fortifications the French were said to have built around the same time period, and also abandoned by the French in 1759. The last fort said to have been built by the French in 1754 in this line of fortifications was Fort Duquesne, situated between the forks of the Ohio in present-day Pittsburgh. Fort Duquesne was considered strategically important for controlling the Ohio country for both settlement and trade. The French were said to have destroyed the fort later on in the French and Indian Wars, and the site was taken over by the British, who were said to have built Fort Pitt, eventually taken over by the Americans, and the area became known as Pittsburgh. Back to Erie. We are told the first railroad station in Erie was established in 1851 and replaced in 1866 by the Romanesque Revival Union Depot, which was demolished in 1925. The current Art Deco Union Station was said to have opened in 1927, designed by the Fellheimer and Wagoner architectural firm we are told was responsible for the Cincinnati Union Terminal. Still in use as part of the Lakeshore Limited route between Boston and the northeastern United States cities of New York and Boston, Erie is the only stop in Pennsylvania. The station's ground floor is commercial space today, including a brew pub. Prescott Isle State Park is an arching peninsula that juts into Lake Erie, 4 miles or 6 kilometers west of the city of Erie. Prescott Isle served as a base for Commodore Oliver Perry's fleet during the War of 1812 and played a part in the victory over the British in the Battle of Lake Erie. The Perry Monument on one of Prescott Isle's southern tips was so named to commemorate this victory. The obelisk is situated on a circular and what definitely appears to be an artificially shaped landform. I typically find obelisks as commemorative monuments, like the Bunker Hill Monument in Boston, Massachusetts. The Sergeant Floyd Monument in Sioux City, Iowa, said to have been erected to commemorate the only death that was said to have occurred during the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1804. And Speke's Monument, located in the Kensington Gardens in London, a red granite obelisk dedicated to John Hanning Speke, the explorer who discovered Lake Victoria and led expeditions to the source of the Nile, to name a few of many such examples. Waldameer Park at the base of Prescott Isle is one of only 13 trolley trolley parks still operating in the United States. Waldameer was first leased as a trolley park in 1896 by the Erie Electric Motor Company and is the fourth oldest amusement park in Pennsylvania and the 10th oldest in the United States. The next and last place I'm going to look at on this alignment is Buffalo, New York's second largest city and the county seat of Erie County. The city serves as a major gateway for travel and commerce across the Canadian border, forming part of the binational Buffalo-Niagara region and Buffalo-Niagara Falls metropolitan area. Niagara Falls is at the international boundary between the United States and Canada, with the city of Niagara Falls in New York on one side and the city of Niagara Falls in Ontario on the other. We are told Europeans started entering the area in the 17th century, with Frenchman Robert de La Salle given the credit for building Fort Conti at the mouth of the Niagara River in 1679 as a base for exploring for the Northwest Passage to Japan and China to extend France's trade. He was accompanied by Belgian priest, missionary, and explorer of the North American interior, Franciscan Father Louis Hennepin, said to have been the first European to see the Niagara Falls. The city of Buffalo is situated on top of the Niagara Escarpment, which forms the falls over which the Niagara River flows through a 36-mile or 58-kilometer channel that connects Lake Erie and Lake Ontario and separates New York from Ontario. The Niagara Escarpment runs predominantly east-west from New York through Ontario, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois in a remarkably geometric-looking shape when you consider the long distance it covers. And this is a view of the Niagara Escarpment pictured on the left in comparison with what is called the Endless Wall at the New River Gorge State Park in West Virginia on the right. Old Fort Erie, now the Fort Erie National Historic Site of Canada, was said to have been constructed by the British as part of a network of fortifications after the 1763 Treaty of Paris, signed at the end of the French and Indian War, in which France ceded its territories east of the Mississippi River to Great Britain. The present fort was said to have been built between 1805 and 1808. The Peace Bridge is an international bridge connecting a location near the center of downtown Buffalo and Fort Erie, Ontario. We are told the idea of a bridge joining the United States and Canada was discussed as early as 1853, though actual construction of the bridge didn't start until August 17th of 1925 and first opened on June 1st of 1927. Typically, we don't ask questions about what we are told, because why on earth would we be lied to? But consider if what we have been told about the construction is consistent with the engineering required to build this massive bridge. This is the Buffalo City Hall, with the McKinley Monument standing in front of it. The story that goes along with this particular obelisk is that it was commissioned by the state of New York and dedicated to the memory of the 25th President of the United States, William McKinley, on September 6 of 1901, who was assassinated while attending the 1901 Pan American Exposition in Buffalo. The 32-story Buffalo City Hall itself was said to have been completed sometime around 1931 by the architectural firm of Dietl, Wade, and Jones in Art Deco style. The Buffalo Central Terminal, another building attributed to Fellheimer and Wagner in the historical narrative, with its construction starting in 1925 and operating as an active station from 1929 to 1979. It was abandoned for years and now owned by a nonprofit preservation group working on restoring and repurposing the complex. This is another train station that brings airships to mind, with its tall main tower and the airplane hangar appearing structure right next to it. The Erie Canal was built in the middle of what was called the American Canal Age between 1790 and 1855 in our historical narrative. The 363-mile or 584-kilometer-long Erie Canal connected the Hudson River in Albany, New York with Lake Erie and Buffalo, New York, and was first used on May 17th of 1821. The construction of the Erie Canal was said to have started on July 4th of 1817 in Rome, New York, where Fort Stanwix is located, said to have been built in 1758 by the British. I'm going to end this video here at the Star Fort Stanwix.